Hey Untold Radio Network fans, want exclusive perks and to support our channel? Introducing our YouTube membership program with 3 amazing levels. Get loyalty badges that level up to different cryptids the longer you're a supporter. How cool is that? You'll also get access to custom Bigfoot emojis and priority in chat. Upgrade to Backstage Pass for exclusive wallpapers, photos, status updates, discounted books, and merchandise. Go all in with the producer level for everything mentioned plus member shoutouts. Ready for an enhanced experience? Join now, pick your membership level, and let's make this journey even more exciting together.
The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Good evening to all my fellow weirdos and weirdettes, all of us in the United States. I hope everybody's having a wonderful Labor Day long weekend. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, here on Talking Weird for the Untold Radio Network. I had a wonderful day today. I think most of you who listen to the show are probably conscious and maybe sick of me talking about the documentary I'm making about Ray Palmer, Shaver Mystery, and the birth of the idea of flying saucers. It's called The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers. And today I spent a wonderful afternoon with Ray Palmer's son, also called Ray Palmer, Raymond B. Palmer, instead of Raymond A. Palmer. And I got to see all manner of marvelous Shaver and Palmer historical objects. I'd almost call them relics, including, and I was almost stunned when I got to hold it, some of the original Maury Island debris from the famous Maury Island incident, which Fred Chrisman sent Ray Palmer all the way back in 1947 in the incident which supposedly predated Kenneth Arnold's sighting, which Kenneth Arnold himself investigated under the employment of Raymond Palmer. So it was a wonderful afternoon, and I'll be keeping you posted on how the documentary travels. Tonight's guest is involved with the documentary a little bit, actually, and he's been on the show before. He was born and raised in the Cascade Mountains, and he hails from a family of storytellers, artists, and musicians. He and his wife, Laura, have spent years collecting folktales and legends of the Pacific Northwest and beyond. And having listened to countless family stories regarding UFOs, Bigfoot, strange supernatural beings, ghost towns, logging camps, railroaders, and bootleggers, he brings authentic first-hand and oral histories for all ages and diverse audiences. With his wife, he wrote the 2019 book, The Odd Man Up. He's also an incredibly talented musician, and I'm fortunate enough to have an amazing song of his in the documentary called Wizard Island, and it's actually about the Darrow and the Tarot and the rest of the Shaver mystery, which is just fantastic. Anyway, I could talk about that all night, and maybe I will talk with him a little bit about it, but I'm delighted to welcome back to the show the one, the only Bob Antone.
Hello, everybody.
So good to have you back, Bob.
Thank you so much. Man, your theme is pretty jamming there. Who wrote that theme song? It's pretty cool.
I'll be honest, I don't know, but I know Doug Hychek put the video and the opener and all the audio and music together, who's the founder and boss of the network. So he chose it, and I was happy with it when he did. When he made it, I was like, that is cool. So yeah, I'm glad you appreciate it, because your song Wizard Island, how do people find your YouTube channel, by the way, which has songs and folktale stuff on there as well, I believe, unless there are separate channels. I know you've got a music channel. I'm not sure if that's the same as your one with the investigations and things.
Yeah, so we have a band called Tinkham Road. Tinkham Road is one thing you can find on YouTube. You can also find on Spotify. You can find on iTunes. But I also have, just under my name, Bob Antone, I have a music channel on YouTube. So if you're interested in seeing my solo music and some group performances and collaborations, you can go on there.
Oh, excellent. I'd just like to say thank you to one of my favorite audience members, Nancy Malcolm, who's also a writer, for the super sticker. Thank you so much for that, Nancy. It's
Sweet.
very much appreciated. Now, last time you were on the show, Bob, you talked about kind of obscure cryptids, and I know how much our audience loved it. And today you're kind of coming back, not this time to talk so much about cryptids, but just strange. And you were telling me about some of them. I never heard about them before the show. So I guess in some ways, obscure, unsolved mysteries.
Yeah, I grew up with the Unsolved Mysteries TV show. Love that show. Fall asleep to that show even to this day. We turn it on, and oh god, you can't go wrong with that. So we compiled a list of my favorite unsolved mysteries. Now, some of these are local from our Seattle area and our neighborhood, our community here, but then some are international. I wanted to kind of do 50-50. So I'll just start right at the top. This is a story from right here in our community. Now, recently on August 15th, there were two people that went missing on the same day. Now, not only two people, but when we talked to law enforcement, they said 32 people went missing on the same day, August 15th, 2023. That is just mind-blowing. So out of the 32, we went searching for two of them. And so, immediately everybody in the community is thinking, oh, serial killer. Are these two disappearances connected? Everybody has their wheels moving. They're thinking, what is going on here? We helped the family of the first missing person. He was a 60-year-old male. His name was Steve. And I know their family. We know their family very well. They're connected to our parish, Our Lady of Sorrows Catholic Church. So we helped in the search for Steve. Now, what's interesting about this is both of them were found deceased. And without going into too much detail, I will say there is no serial killer that we know of. They were both natural causes, accidental causes of death, some very unfortunate causes. But Steve, this gentleman that we first started to search for, he was a witness in a very famous incident. Their family lives in a place called Circle River. Now, in Circle River, they would look out the window on their front lawn, and occasionally they would see this black shadow figure of this person kind of hunched over, kind of with a hoodie on, with like a duffel bag, walking across the front lawn. And then at some point, this figure would just vanish. So kind of somewhat transparent, somewhat see-through, that kind of thing, like a phantom. So it turns out shortly before these apparitions started to appear in Circle River, and Steve, this gentleman that went missing, saw this apparition, there was an incident next door. And there was a man named Kenneth Boonstra. You can look this up. You'll find this in newspapers. This has been reported on. He was obsessed with this woman that lived next door. He would stalk her, and he would actually walk that exact trail right in front of the house, right where these folks saw this figure. And he would stand there and he would watch her for days and days and days. Very, very creepy. No one knows why he did this. And eventually he acted upon it. And first on Mother's Day, he attacked the family, just randomly attacked the family, and knocked this woman over that he was obsessed with, knocked her to the ground, stole her purse, ran out in the woods. That evening he came back, and the dog started barking. And so the husband got up, and he's this big firefighter, and he's on edge, man. He's going to protect his wife. I'll tell you what. So he gets up and he looks down the hallway, and sure enough, he sees this shadow of this figure standing at the end of the hallway. And his adrenaline, as my adrenaline would be, just going. And he went charging, and this figure came running right at him. And they met right in the middle of the hallway and just started brawling. And, the wife got up and was screaming. And the intruder, Kenneth, he overpowered this firefighter. This guy is pretty big too. And no matter how hard he would hit him, he just wouldn't go down. He wouldn't go down. And she could see that this intruder was overtaking her husband. So she went into the kitchen. This is after hitting him over the head with a baseball bat several times. Gosh. She went in the kitchen and she finally grabbed a knife. This is what she had to do to defend her family. She finally grabbed a knife and she stabbed him like 27 times. And he finally bled out and he died there. But so this gentleman that went missing on August 15th, his name was Steve, was someone who saw the apparition of Kenneth Boonstra this creepy stalker guy that, was retracing his steps through some kind of time loop. I don't know what you want to call it, but a residual haunting. He just kept crossing the same steps, approaching the house with his duffel bag. Very, very strange story. Nobody knows why he was so obsessed and why he lost his mind. So that's, I just want to start out with a banger there. What do you think? There
It's
you
incredible. Do people still see the apparition today?
Yes, I have heard a few other neighbors report seeing this apparition for sure. Yep.
I mean, I guess it makes sense. It's something with so much violence and obsession attached to it.
Mhm.
So I can only imagine the amounts of psychic energy that would be involved in that kind of a situation.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And so it's very interesting. The other brother, the whole family, and the other brother that saw this apparition, he's not quite a believer in God, say. He's sort of an atheist. He doesn't believe in the supernatural, but he did admit that he did see this apparition, which is huge, for somebody that does not believe. So
Goodness gracious. Yeah,
so
it's a spooky haunting story. That is, I've never heard that story before either. Never heard.
Yeah, you can look it up, Seattle Times. You can look it up, Snoqualmie Valley Record. That's well documented. Not the ghost part. That's the oral history section. But as far as the crime, so I have another story. This is story number 2.
Excellent.
This is one that I heard so often. My grandparents loved to tell the story. In fact, they loved it so much they went to visit this location. So there is a spiral staircase located in New Mexico at the Loreto Chapel. And it was completed in 1878. And apparently the nuns were trying to solve a problem. There was a 22-foot space between the ground floor and the choir loft. And they wanted to create an access so they could get up to the choir loft. And so they called a bunch of carpenters, and the carpenters looked it over and said, "Oh, we're just going to put a ladder up." And they didn't like the idea of a ladder because this is a very ornate, beautiful church with a lot of architecture and a lot of thought put into it and engineering. So they decided they would pray for 9 days. So they prayed to Saint Joseph, the saint of carpenters, for 9 days. And the story goes, on the 9th day, a man appeared, and he had a donkey with him, and he had a box of really crude tools, and just, really simple, like hand saw and a little measuring tape and a kind of a planer. And he came in and he said, "Yeah, I'm looking for work. I heard that you're looking for a carpenter." And so the nuns hired him. So it says that a couple months later, the staircase was completed, but there was no trace of the carpenter. So he just disappeared. He went away. He didn't even want to get paid. The creepy part of this is that there are no supports. It was so the staircase has 360-degree turns, 2 of them, but no visible means of support. And the wood was analyzed. Now, this is where it gets really good. This is factual. You can look this up. Scientists have analyzed the wood. They determined the wood to be spruce, but not native to the area. That's the first part. The other part that's very exciting, it's not native to anything found on Earth. That's what it says on Wikipedia. Yeah.
Quite literally. What off Earth, perhaps?
It's so interesting. And then he used wooden nails and compression, kind of like the Amish. But so far advanced. There's 33 steps equal to the years of Christ's age, when he was crucified. Very, very interesting. My grandparents visited that location, and they walked up the steps, and I heard it my whole life. Just a really, really cool unsolved mystery there.
What year did you say it was built approximately, or what century?
1878. Yep.
Okay.
In New Mexico.
New Mexico is the land of enchantment. I always think Wisconsin's weird, but when you start to look at New Mexico, it's loaded with all kinds of strangeness as well. I've never heard that New Mexican tale before, but it fits right in there. How fantastic.
All right, we got next up, kind of on the same lines, we have the church in Lahaina in Maui. All of you have been following the news, and you probably know by now there was a major, catastrophic fire that killed a lot of people in Maui. But one of the miracles that happened, and you can look this up, this is verifiable, that the Catholic Church, Maria Lanakila Catholic Church in Lahaina was completely untouched. In fact, when the priest went in to check on the inside, the flowers hadn't even wilted on the altar. Isn't that bizarre?
Wow.
Everything around it burned to the ground. You had the convent, you had the daycare, everything burned to ashes. The church was untouched. And so the Catholic Church is saying it's a miracle. It's definitely an unsolved mystery. No one understands the physics of that. It is absolutely bizarre.
That is a miracle for that not to be touched.
The other place where that happened very similar was St. Paul's Chapel in New York City on 9/11. So when the towers collapsed, St. Paul's was completely untouched. So it's another example of a Catholic Church survival. I thought it was pretty cool.
It's like the hand of God reached over and said, "You're not taking these out."
Absolutely.
They are cool stories. And they're positive, cool stories, which is good as well. It's always nice to have the mysteries which have the nicer bent instead of the spooky bent ones are fun as well, of course. But it's nice to hear the nice ones also.
I agree.
And I'm loving your story. I'm loving your stories, by the way, Bob. Yeah, and if anybody wants to ask Bob anything in the any of our wonderful listeners in the our viewers in the chat, feel free to shoot off a question to Bob, because I'm sure he'll do his best to answer it. I'm sure he will answer it. So, when you hear something like that, Bob, do you tend to lean towards it being, because I know there are skeptics who just say, well, that's just a coincidence, but do you tend to lean towards a miraculous interpretation when you hear a tale like that? Or
I do. I tend to lean toward miraculous. Yeah.
Me too.
And yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. I have another great story, and this is shout out to our friends over in the UK. I have to add an English story. You'll love this one. This is so interesting. Very well documented. You can look this up. If anyone wants to fact check me, do it, because it's there's a lot of information. There was a gentleman named Andrew Jepson, and he was from Wolverhampton, England. He was working on a construction site in the 1990s. Now, he was distracted. I don't know what was going on, but he was distracted. And right behind him, there was a 4-ton steamroller. And this is kind of a device that compacts gravel, and you're laying out layers of gravel, preparing maybe to pour concrete or something like that, maybe asphalt. So he was distracted. The driver couldn't stop the steamroller. And you know what happened next? He got his legs caught under this 4-ton steamroller, and he was completely rolled over. And I mean, 4 tons, come on.
Good night.
I know. And the thing that's so strange is that, the driver decided to just keep going. He didn't even try to put on the brake because he figured it would minimize the damage. Well, when he got on the other side, Andrew, he gets up out of the gravel and just kind of brushes his hair. And I mean, oh my God. So there have been scientists that have actually tried to recreate this event. They used frozen chickens. You can look at this on TV. And they literally laid this out and recreated it. And they said there's no way that this guy could have survived. He should have been absolutely smushed into blobs of fleshy meat. It's the strangest story, the most interesting unsolved mystery. Yeah.
Those weird accident stories, it always fascinates me when somebody has an experience which should have killed or really seriously injured and they walk away unscathed. I remember my little cousin when I was a child. He was younger than me, probably considerably younger, so I probably would have been 12 and he might have been I don't know, maybe I was 10, he was 2 or something. At the back of my grandmother's house, it was a 2-story house, and it was fairly kind of high, the back second story, a big staircase went up, and it was an outside staircase, so you could access the bottom dwelling and the top dwelling, an old kind of house. And he rolled off the top, and it was a drop that I guarantee you, if you or I rolled off, we'd be dead, or we'd be hospitalized for, a serious amount of time, unscathed. And it was cement underneath. I'm talking about a drop. It'd be from the top of my roof to, I wouldn't say, I don't think I'd even survive it. No, he was unscathed. Little kid just rolled off, boom, onto cement. So when things like that happen, you do wonder. Mm-hmm. Same with the steamrolling story. How on earth is this stuff possible?
So strange.
Just one thing
All right.
quickly I wanted to ask you too, because I
Yeah.
knew we were doing mysteries tonight. When the British one made me think of it, because when I was a kid, one of my favorite British mysteries, and when I say favorite, it used to cause me many a sleepless night as well. I think it was talked about in one of the Unwin books on the supernatural, like Unwin's book on ghosts or something, which was a British book very popular in Australia when I was a kid. And that's the Jeff the Talking Mongoose story. And I've seen they finally made a movie about it called Nandor Fodor and the Talking Mongoose. I think Nandor Fodor was the investigator or something. And Sam Sheeran, who's been on the show before, I believe he's an artist. He did the art for the film. Simon Pegg stars as Nandor Fodor in this new Jeff the Talking Mongoose movie, which I think is in cinemas now. It's about to be. I can't believe they made a movie about the Jeff the Talking Mongoose story. How cool.
Oh, man. Oh, yeah. I love that story. That's great. Super cool. I've got another one that is right back at our hometown. This is one of my favorite stories. In fact, I learned this from the local historian. Her grandfather, who just passed away at the age of 101 years old, his name was David Lake. He was the guy that shared this story. This was one of his famous stories. So she shared this with me, and in honor of David Lake, our elder, I'm gonna share this. So back in the 1970s, there used to be a Weyerhaeuser mill. It's no longer there anymore. It was a sawmill. It's now completely gone. But back in the 70s, it was quite active, and David was there working. And so there was a guest speaker from the University of Washington, and he came to talk to the employees about the history of geology, the history of the Snoqualmie Valley, Snoqualmie Falls, volcanic activity, the Ice Age, that kind of thing. So at some point during his lecture, he says that he and a colleague, this is so cool, they found a tunnel under Mount Si. Now, Mount Si is just right over here. And that tunnel went for about 8 miles in the direction of Marysville, Washington. And they decided to explore this tunnel. And they went far. They went all 8 miles. And the speaker claimed that he and a colleague found a fire ring at the center of the tunnel. And they carbon dated the fire ring. And they said that there was human activity 7,500 years ago, something like that. And all these rednecks, including David, were just like, there's drool coming out of their mouths. They're just like, oh my God, because they know these woods, right? They know these woods, and they're like, there's a tunnel to Marysville. You know what I mean? And so They were just stunned, right? So they walked up after the lecture. They shook this man's hand. Nice to meet you. But nobody remembered his name, of course, right? So for the next 2 weeks, all these guys, including David, they were in their pickup trucks and they were driving all over the mountains, and they were looking for the entrance to this cave, this tunnel. They're just like, oh my God, where is this tunnel? And they couldn't find it, right? They couldn't find it. So in frustration, they went back to their boss and they said, we demand to know who that speaker was. We've got to talk to him again. I want you to call the University of Washington. I want you to find out who that person was. We have to have answers. We want to know where that cave is. So the manager at the Weyerhaeuser Mill, they call University of Washington, and they get somebody on the phone, and they're talking and asking questions, and they're saying, hey, we had this event on this date, and who did you send out to speak to the employees? And so the answer was, well, we never sent anyone out to speak to anyone at Weyerhaeuser. So there's a mystery right there.
So somebody just shows up and tells this incredible story, and they have no idea where he came from.
The thing about it that's so fascinating is there is a fault line that goes right by our house here. And in other parts of the world, sometimes I've heard that faults can shift and create a hallway. And they've seen this in other parts of the world and other mountain ranges. So it's very possible that this fault line that goes right here by the house, it actually shifted maybe during an earthquake, and maybe there really is a hallway that goes 8 miles. It's very possible.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know what Richard Shaver would have said. He would have said it was one of the cavern people visiting. Somebody, a Tero perhaps, maybe not the Dero. The Dero probably wouldn't have told you, but maybe somebody from the friendlier underground race came to tell the people a true story.
Yeah, that's really cool. That actually could be yeah, we could go that direction if you want.
I
Are
can't.
there
I
any
can't help
questions?
but bring. I can't help but bring Shaver. I've seen a number of comments of people saying how creepy and like wow about the stories, and
Oh, cool.
yeah, no, people are definitely enjoying. Great ghost story from a
Good.
previous one. Yeah, no, people are enjoying the stories. I think it's nice sometimes to have somebody on who just tells stories. It changes the dynamic a little bit too. You know, just a questioning kind of show. As soon as I see if there are any questions, Ken Rock said a lizard person, perhaps. Well,
Nice.
you never know. You never know who's down there in the caverns. And that, of course, putting Shaver aside for a minute, there's a long history, of course, of the idea that there are things and people underground and ancient civilizations and everything from lizard people to fairy folk to the Tarot to the Darrow to underground alien bases. These ideas have been with us for almost ever, that there's
Yeah.
mysteries beneath the earth. And that you said that fault line runs right past your place there too, you were saying.
Yeah, the reason I know it's the fault line is because when we're getting on the freeway and I've got a cup of coffee and I'm driving, it's always the spot where we go over the bumps and I spill the coffee all over my lap. So that's why I know it's the fault line.
Ed Schultz, another regular on the show, who used to be known as a psychic priest and was an exorcist for Ed and Lorraine Warren, and is just completing his memoirs at the moment. Memoirs of a Psychic Priest said these stories should be in a book. So Ed is obviously enjoying the tales as well.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you so much. That means a lot. And yeah, cheers to David Lake, our elder, and in honor of his recent passing. So he was a great storyteller and woodsman and all that good stuff. Okay, so you know about Ted Bundy. You've heard, you know the name Ted Bundy. It's
Sure.
quite famous. So in North Bend, Washington, in the 1970s, we have a little mystery here because there are certain individuals who claim to have seen and worked with Ted Bundy. And I've reached out to so-called, Bundy experts, and I've talked to even one of the victims that escaped. And, there was one lady that, jumped out of the car or escaped. And I've ran this by folks, and they don't know what to think. But the thing is, there have been multiple witnesses that claim that Ted Bundy was working at the Busy Bee Cafe in downtown North Bend, the town that I'm in right now, in the summer of 1973. So when you look at the timeline of Ted Bundy's life, if you look at 1973, that's right before his killing spree began. And it's a place where there's not a lot of documentation. It seems to be a hole where possibly this could be true. So a woman named Kathy Johnson claimed to play pool and have a drink with Ted at the Sure Shot Tavern in the summer of 1973. And then a woman named Aloha Berkebile, she worked alongside him. He was supposedly a line cook. She actually worked right alongside him. And so that's a mystery that I would love any Bundy enthusiasts, that's not the right word, any Bundy researchers, there we go, would like to delve into this. I would welcome some help on that, because is it possible that he was here in the summer of 1973? Because that doesn't appear in any books. That's all oral history. And that would be an amazing chapter to add to the story of Ted Bundy.
Do you know if they happen to coincide with any disappearances or anything like that at the time? Just curious.
Not. It wasn't until 74 that the disappearances started. So we think that he was sort of thinking about it and fantasizing and sort of playing out these things in his brain the summer before. And it wasn't until January of 1974 where he started to actually enact upon those fantasies and that kind of thing. So it could be that he was just thinking about it, scoping it out type of thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's certainly been a bit of a Bundy renaissance. Was it an Amazon series or a Netflix series? There was some Bundy girlfriend series recently, and it seemed to... There's a fascination a lot of people have with the serial killer.
Absolutely. And they say that, like, wherever he worked or lived or, did his thing, that there is sort of a residual evil or a demonic presence. And I think I've talked to you before, maybe it was you, I don't remember. The contractors at his childhood home reported paranormal phenomenon in the home. And so there were messages written in the dust. The words "help me" were written in the dust at his childhood home in Tacoma.
Wow. I don't know if you did tell me that story before.
yeah, we went there one time. My wife and I just checked out the neighborhood and went to his house. But there was dust all over the basement, and there were no footprints leading up to the window, but someone clearly wrote "Help me," and there would have been footprints or evidence of someone walking up to do that, but there wasn't.
Gosh.
So, and there's other things, other places that he'd been that report like demonic energy or presences or things that are not quite good. So, yeah.
Did you ever check out Maury Island when you were in the Tacoma kind of area?
We did. We actually walked the beach there where the events unfolded. We actually camped, my wife and I, for her birthday. Went to Maury Island and camped for 4 days. And we went to the lighthouse there. It was really, fantastic. Beautiful place.
Wow.
Yep.
Did you have any strange feelings or anything weird happen while you were there, or?
Yeah, we kind of did. It wasn't related to the Maury Island incident story, but so at the time we were there, we were preparing for an event coming up, and it was a naming ceremony for some of the local tribes here. And so I had been asked to carve some of the regalia and some of the pieces for this traditional naming ceremony. The traditional naming ceremony is like you receive a name in the language, and it was strange because some of the elements of the story that was connected to this woman who we were sponsoring or we were working with appeared in real life, and there was kind of some strange things that happened on Maury Island, and there was a wind that came out of nowhere, and there were some birds that were making themselves known. It's very interesting, but that's the only thing that I can remember that was a little bit odd. But in our life, that's kind of common. I guess it happens all the time. So, yeah.
Fantastic. I think I saw a video. Was it a video of you and your wife I saw going up Gravity Hill, or one of those Gravity Hill things recently? That was fascinating.
Yeah. We did. We tried it out, and it was real. So
where is
cool.
that? Where was that place? Where was it? I watched the video, but
yeah, that's in Prosser, Washington. Yeah, Prosser. So a lot of people explain it as it's just an optical illusion. So but it was pretty fun anyway. I think it is an optical illusion actually, but anyway.
Yeah, because you put your car in neutral and it looks like it rolls up a hill. So it's
Pretty
one
much.
heck of it. Even when you were filming it, it looked like you were rolling up a hill. So
Yep. I love it. Yep.
Just incredible.
So are there any questions from anything I've talked about so far?
I mean, there's broad kind of, I suppose, Fordian questions from me. Do you think things, for example, like the Bundy childhood home messages, do you think that's some kind of extant spiritual reality, or do you think that's some residual psychic energy, or what are your thoughts on things like that?
Yeah, I think that my personal belief is that the more deaths and murders and suicides and dark things that happen on a landscape, it accumulates energy. It just starts to grow, almost like a balloon filled with helium or something like that. And the more it like snowballs, and it becomes to a point where it can't be ignored anymore. So a lot of the famous hauntings, and I think Ted Bundy in his mind was like that. He was he was filled up with that stuff. He was filled up with just this dark stuff, right? Just in his, wherever he walked around to, he would spread it around type thing. But as far as locations, there are so many places where, because of the numerous deaths and murders, suicides, you can't ignore it. You just can't ignore it. And everybody knows that the place is haunted, and, people see things. Even people that don't believe in the paranormal will see things at those locations. It's just a cumulative effect. It's, it draws in energy. And some people, like in the dark arts, they try to harness that. They use that as power, so they will take that energy, that despair, that fear, and they will use it for other things, nefarious things. So that's sort of the definition of like what you call black magic. People take advantage of that energy. Mm-hmm.
Do you think Bundy himself might have been influenced by something spiritual or something outside of himself? Or
Yes, I do, because in one of the interviews, he talks about he was speaking to some entity. You can look this up. I think it was on one of the Netflix series, and it plays a recording where he's admitting that he's talking to some dark entity within himself, not himself, but something dark, demonic, and answering questions or taking orders from something in the darkness within himself. And that is documented if you look that up. Yep.
well, I think Son of Sam had like a dog he talked to or something, like a
Uh-huh.
black dog or so. It is interesting that some of these people seem to be and of course the skeptical type of position would just be, well, the person was insane, so of course they're hearing voices and things. But I know, again, getting back to Richard Shaver, he often wondered if people didn't do things because they were malevolent. He would have thought it was the Darrow, but maybe that's just a literalization of something which is a non-human intelligence, which directs or encourages people on a certain track to continue down that path to do wicked, horrible things. And speaking about influences, here's a question from Nancy for you, Bob. It says, do you think oral storytellers maybe attract or even summon paranormal entities or activities?
I do. I think that's very possible. I think especially what language you're speaking in. So for instance, if I was speaking in, indigenous language, I would automatically attract, those spirits that are right here on this land. And their eyes would they would perk up and they would hear me speaking their language, this ancient language. When a language has been spoken on a landscape for thousands of years, that also accumulates energy. So if you start telling a story in that language, oh my gosh, that is like direct, you're tapping into the spirit world, in my opinion. Language is so important and movement is so important. So like the order of the rhythm of what you're doing, the rhythm of that ritual or whatever you're saying, that poem, or the rhythm of your speech, if it's ancient, if it's been repeated over and over again, absolutely will it accumulate all of that history into that rhythm, into that space. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is interesting. I was watching the new Small Town Monsters documentary, Land of the Missing, the other day, and there was somebody mentioned something in there I've certainly heard before, that there are certain Native American tribes that don't like to even talk about Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever the term is, because they think then it will notice you. I've heard similar things talked about, things like skinwalkers and various other entities. Even in the Western traditions,
Yep.
we don't like, it was well known you shouldn't talk about the fair folk. Like, even to say fair folk was a nice way of dealing with it, rather than saying like the fairies or something they might take offense to. But it was known that you shouldn't even talk about them, because then they'll notice you.
Yeah, and that's why when like someone recites the rosary or says say the Lord's Prayer, these words have been said for in the same way often and repeated, and it has a power, a good power. It has the opposite, And so that's a good example of, oral history, just the prayers that people, recite. It could be a Buddhist prayer. It could be, whatever religion that is. If it's repeated verbatim, it has power. It has power of all those people before that have repeated that exact same thing. All of those lives are contained within that, within that rhythm of that language. So that's what I believe. Absolutely. He who should not be named.
Yeah, that's what Ed Schultz just said. And Nancy was thanks you for the question, and agreed that there are certain things you shouldn't talk about. Ed Schultz also suggested, I think when we were talking about potentially what were the hauntings or what were the influences, he suggested stone tape theory. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so what I understand about stone tape theory is, like, especially in England where there's castles and old ruins, that some of the traumatic events or historical events are somehow recorded in the framework of the old building. That's kind of what I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's kind of where the stone tape theory came from. A lot of these old buildings, it could be the East Coast, but a lot of these old stone and brick buildings and that kind of thing are said to contain and record somehow the residual haunting within the wood, within the timber, within the stone, that kind of thing. So I think it's very possible. I've got a mummy story if you guys want to hear it. You guys ready?
Yeah, I want to hear it.
Okay, this is bizarre. And this is not, you cannot find this anywhere online. This is complete oral history. And I don't think I've ever talked about this publicly. So I had a friend that worked as a flagger over in Eastern Washington, and she is now deceased. Her name was Gail. She was part of the Yakima. She was Yakima and Snoqualmie tribal. And she was working on the Suncadia Resort project. So there were folks in the woods, and they were digging lines. There were utility lines, they were for natural gas and whatnot, trying to build up this Suncadia Resort. Suddenly, one of the machines, the track hoe, turned off. She's like, "Oh!" So she heard the guy turn his engine off, and he comes stumbling out of the woods, and his face is just completely white. And he comes over to her and he goes, "Please come here. I got to show you something." Like he was shaking. He was so frightened. And so she put down her flag and she walked through the woods back to where he was working. And he had actually uncovered a hole in the ground that was airtight, kind of like a tomb. And there was a hole. And he said that when he dug into this hole, like all this air kind of gushed out, almost like when they first opened the pyramids, all the air that kind of gushed out. And they peeked in that hole and they had flashlights. And I'll tell you what they saw in that hole. You ready? This is in Washington State. This is crazy.
Gosh.
There was a little woman, a mummy, on an altar, and there were artifacts all around her. And it did not look like it was from this culture. And it looked very strange.
Goodness.
It looked very old. And very strange. Like she didn't recognize the culture. And it was definitely a mummy, but it was a little person, looked female. She said she felt it was a female. And there were little artifacts, pieces of pottery and things all around her on this altar in this sealed off tomb that he had broken into accidentally. Now this is up near the Yakima River. This is up toward Ellensburg, whatnot. So she goes, I would like you to rebury this. I want you to not tell anyone what you saw. I want you to, please cover this back up. We don't want anybody to know about this. We want to leave this in the ground. That was her cultural response, right? And that was her gut feeling. And so he did. There were two gentlemen on the job. And so those guys, they went, naturally they went home and they told their wives of what happened during the day. I mean, I would too. That's just like, whoa, that is so crazy.
Right.
That's so interesting. Right. So the next day or maybe 2 days later, they're on the same job. And these folks come from Central Washington University, and they come up to her and they said, "I heard you found something in the woods." They all knew about it, the archaeology department at Central College in Ellensburg, and they were ready to, and I would be too. I'd be like, "Oh my God, can you imagine the discovery? What if that was like, some ancient race of human being that came and visited the area?" And that is just mind blowing. So I don't know. The mystery is I don't know what that mummy was. I don't know whatever happened to that whole situation. But all I know is when you go on the brochure of Suncadia and you read the fine print, it says something to the effect of, the Yakima tribe came and oversaw some significant archaeological finds, and it's a private matter, but it is in print. And what a story. I mean, wow.
That is a fascinating story. I think
Yeah.
there's lots of tales about things being overlooked or hidden archaeologically in this country, like tales of giant skeletons and tales of, early European explorations and things that mightn't fit the traditional archaeological paradigm. Some people say intentionally get buried or ignored or put aside. We had a question from Horace Smith before. Horace Smith is the professor of astronomy or professor emeritus, rather, of astronomy and physics at Michigan State University. And we had him on a couple of weeks ago with Edward Gamont talking about his new Lovecraft book, When the Stars Are Right, about Lovecraft and astronomy. But he asked something, and maybe you'll have a take on this, Bob. He says, this is when we were talking about more supernatural type of experiences. And then there are those such as myself who never seem to experience ghosts or paranormal phenomena, just insensitive. What do you think about the predilection of some people who seem to experience things which are supernatural and some people who never seem to have experiences, Bob?
Yeah, I just think some people have that extra something, like it's like a device that, you have the ability to pick up certain frequencies. And some human beings have an extra sense, or they can see things that aren't normally sensed by other members of the population. I think it's very possible. There's so much around us, when you talk to scientists that are studying quantum physics and the possibility of parallel dimensions, and there could be so much around us that we can sort of sense at times, and some of us have that extra ability. I know there are studies about the frontal lobe and like damage to people that are have head trauma or PTSD. I know there are studies that say they're more prone to be sensitive to things like ghosts and paranormal phenomenon, and that could be a scientific explanation. I've heard that before, but in my lifetime, and I will just say, just working with all the different people that we've worked with, all the different cultures, and witnessed so many different things, I just know there's something to it, because I've seen things. There have been situations where a group of people who don't know each other will witness the same thing. They'll witness the same thing, and it's totally, totally out of this world, bizarre. And there's no way that they would have got together and made that up together. And there's no reason or motive to do that. And I just think that not everybody can do that. Not everybody can see those things, and that's not a bad thing. It's just not, it's just, there's other senses in this world. Yep. Okay. Odd things in the state. This is a very good show tonight. Thank you so much, Anita.
Anita said, hello all, I live in Washington state and I'm amazed at the odd things in the state. This is a very good show tonight. It is a good show, Bob. It's always fascinating to talk to you. So I know you've experienced all kinds of things. What is there a recent experience you could maybe tell us about, something that's happened to you in the last few months? Or
yeah, there is that one. And it's very recent, but the thing about it, I do have to be kind of like, I can't talk about it just out of respect. Yeah.
Okay, I think
so
I
one
know
of
the
the
one you mean. Yeah. Is there another one you could tell us about of some? Because I don't think we've had you on for about 6 months. I think you were a fairly early guest when we moved over to Untold, if I recall. It was some time ago.
I mean, I could tell this story. I'll tell you a story. Okay. All right, here we go. So this is something that you could ponder. This is very interesting. So there was a time when we had some folks that lived here at our house temporarily. They were like foster care, just youth, and their parents were going through a hard time. And at some point, I heard a scream, and the young lady that was here, she saw a bird in the back room. Have I told you the story yet about the bird?
No, I want to hear it.
Okay. So I went into the back room, which is right over here, and there was a snowbird, and it was flying around the inside of the frame of the window. And all three of these, kids, they're related, they were siblings. They were so scared because in their culture, this is also like Irish culture as well. This is Celtic belief. When you see a robin or a bird on the inside of your house, that is an omen of death, right? And in the cultures here in the Puget Sound and the Salish Sea, it's the same thing. When you see a robin, so they were so scared. Their grandfather had warned them, if you ever see a bird inside, that's a sign of death. So I said, okay, don't worry. And so I reached down and I grabbed a piece of clothing off the ground, and I said, we're going to get this bird outside. Don't you worry. Don't worry at all. And so I had taken this cloth or whatever it was that I grabbed, a shirt. I don't know what I picked up off the ground. And I just sort of cornered that little snowbird, and I wrapped that cloth around the body of the bird. And I could feel the bird wriggling in my hand. I could feel it wriggling. And I said, we're gonna set him free. We're gonna go outside. So I walked out with the bird in my hand, wriggling. I could feel it the whole time. I knew it was in my hand. And we walked around the corner here, and all three of the kids came with me, and we walked out the door here, and we walked out the backyard. And I said, okay, 1, 2, 3. And I opened the shirt or whatever it was, and there was no bird. It had vanished in my hands.
Goodness gracious.
So all three of us, three kids and me, all four of us saw this bird and then saw it vanish. Totally unexplainable. Don't know what happened. So here's the end of that story. And this is very recently. So I mentioned Maury Island. I mentioned some of the artifacts or some of the regalia that we were working on, that kind of thing. Well, the story that was connected to the naming ceremony happened to be Snowbird, the Snowbird story. And this is a very old legend, and it was shared back in the 1800s. It was documented by the university. It's a very old tribal story. Anyway, without going into detail about that story, the day of the naming ceremony, now just this is crazy, okay? I got up, and my wife and I, we looked out our bedroom window, and there was the same snowbird that vanished in 2003. It was on the outside, and it was looking in our window. That same snowbird.
Gracious.
So 2023, it was 20 years later, suddenly, and it was connected to the cultural story. And its face was black. And in the story, the face of the snowbird is charcoal black. It's part of the legend. It's part of the folklore.
Wow.
And that bird appeared. And that was the same bird that disappeared in my hands in 2003. So there you go.
Goodness gracious. There's something about birds, like some cultures think of them as you were saying, like an omen of death. Some think about
Sure.
them as carrying messages from the spirit world. Jung talked about the significance of some of his patients of birds at the window. I'll tell you my own bird story very quickly. This was super weird. It weirded me the heck out. Not because it was overly scary or spooky, but the synchronicity of it was uncanny. A couple of years ago, my daughter used to love, even probably more recently, she still liked to do it, but she was really into it a couple of years ago. She used to love to make little animals and little figures out of pipe cleaners, colored pipe cleaners. I used to do it as a kid, and I guess I taught her how to do it. She used to like me to make things for her that she was interested in. So she might be make a pony, or, make this cartoon character or whatever. And one day she came over while I was working at working on my laptop down on the kitchen table, which is in a corner of a room with glass kind of windows all around it in the cabin. And she wanted me to make a hummingbird for her. She literally come over, make me a hummingbird. I started to make her a hummingbird, probably over halfway through making her the hummingbird. And there was this big tap at the window. Something hit the window. My daughter's like, what was that? And we went over there, and a hummingbird had flown into that window and had stunned itself and was literally lying there somewhat unconscious. And we went out and looked at it, and then it kind of woke up and it flew away. But what was the probability of my daughter deciding she wanted me to make her a hummingbird, and in the process of me making her the hummingbird out of pipe cleaners, that a hummingbird would fly into the window immediately next to us, get our attention and be stunned, and then fly away when we looked at it? That was uncanny. So there is something about birds. I'm not sure what it is, but there's something about them.
That is so cool. I love that. That's a great story. That's
I actually
really
posted
cool.
on Facebook at the time because I was so stunned. I went, I can't believe this just happened. Very strange.
I've got another couple little stories here. I thought I would bring up the 9/11. We talked about the church that survived 9/11. Now, talking about time travel, so there was a woman named Bonnie McEnany, whose husband Eamon died in the attacks on 9/11. And she wrote a book called Messages, Signs, Visits, and Premonitions from Loved Ones Lost on 9/11. And so there are all these cases of people that had an instinct, not to go to work that day or not to get on the plane, or there are even artists that painted pictures or did artwork, right before 9/11 depicting the events. So I wanted to bring this up because let's talk about time. So there's a theory, and I think it's pretty plausible if you really think about it. You could argue that if there's an event that is big enough, if you imagine like a rock being thrown in a pond or a lake, a big rock, right? And the ripples, coming from that event, and if you think about time, let's say those ripples are rippling back through time because that event, that rock is so large enough. That would explain psychic phenomenon on a scientific level. I think it could. I'm not a scientist, but I think it's very logical what I just said. And I don't know where I heard that from. I think I heard that from somebody. I can't claim that I came up with that idea, but I think it's a brilliant idea. So a lot of people think that because 9/11 was such a large event, so many people died, so dramatic, that the ripples of time, just like that rock being, thrown in the water, rippled back, and people could, collect that information in various ways, so.
Fascinating. There certainly were popular culture interpretations of 9/11 before 9/11. Like everybody's seen the Simpson kind of, people have gone back to the Simpsons and shown them 9/11 coding in there, and the classic Lone Gunman episode, which was the spin-off series from the X-Men, where not the X-Men, the X-Files, where where the lone gunmen are trying to stop this plot to take down the World Trade Towers by flying in a passenger airliner which has been taken over by some type of sinister remote control. So that was, and there's other things. I think Fight Club has a weird, I had a guest on recently, we were talking about how the release of Fight Club and the collapsing of buildings in there coincided spookily with 9/11. So I think there is some. And I've also heard ideas, and I'm not a physicist, I won't pretend to be one, but I've heard people suggest in higher ends of physics today that perhaps things that happen in the present can somehow impact the past as well. And that's mind-blowing to think what is done today can somehow, like you're talking about, ripple out and affect things before they happen. Like it's just, or, it's anyway, it's so weird. It's so strange.
It's so strange.
It's weird. Yeah.
Okay, so I've got a UFO story from China. I thought we'd just go to China. Why not? You don't hear about UFOs in China very often. So there's something called I hope I'm saying this right, Kaifeng UFO debris incident in China. So on June 23rd, 1990 at 3 a.m., people in the Henan province saw a row of orange and green lights in the sky. And there was a gentleman sleeping on the roof of the police station. He was a police officer. And you spell his first name XU. I don't know how to pronounce it. But it was so hot. It was the summertime. So a lot of people were sleeping on the roofs just to escape the muggy heat in their houses. So he heard a loud thundering sound and saw a fireball. And then he saw an object detach. And it kind of landed in a very populated area. And so he got on the horn and he deployed his officers. He's a police captain, and he deployed all these police to find where this object landed. And they found it in the courtyard of number 24, and I can't pronounce the street, in Kaifeng. And there was a man named Xing. I think that's how you say his name. Xing. And it was his residence. It hit his trees in his courtyard, damaged his trees, and they found the object laying there. And the first thing that was very strange is they expected it to be red hot, and it was cold to the touch. It was completely cold. And the object was 50 by 11 centimeters, and it was kind of a triangular long object, a block of some kind. It weighed about 6 kilograms, and very mysterious. They had a scientist. This is all documented. This is through the government there. So this is all traceable. You can look this up. This is verifiable. Someone analyzed the contents of this object, and they broke down a ratio of aluminum and different elements. You can look that up online. So about a year later, the trees in this courtyard started to die. And so the government was afraid maybe there was radiation. So they had everybody in that block, temporarily leave that block and had them checked out at the hospital for radiation poisoning. People were complaining they were feeling sick. And the person that owned the courtyard himself was feeling really sick. In fact, he had like a stroke, and he ended up in the hospital, and he was unresponsive, almost like a coma state. And so the story goes that he went from completely no hope. He was scheduled to pass away, to miraculously coming back to full health. And before he came back came back in, stood up in the room, he said he was visited by 2 alien beings at the bedside, 2 little strange creatures that came up and talked to him. And they talked to him in his language, I guess. And they were definitely not human. And so it's one of those really cool stories from China. I'd never heard about it before. I thought, what the heck? Let's talk about it. It's pretty neat.
Wow. What year did you say this was? What year was it?
June 23rd, 1990. So June 24th, that's the Kenneth Arnold,
Yeah,
and June 21st is the Maury Island incident. So I thought, this is kind of cool. June 23rd,
that is
right
cool.
between. Now this is very similar to Maury Island in a way, but you said you touched fragments of the Maury Island incident.
Yeah, I touched the one remaining fragment that the Palmers have. Like, apparently, I think Raymond A. Palmer had multiple fragments. I think he'd given them away, and this is all that the family have now. One remaining Maury Island fragment given to them by this is the fragments that Fred Chrisman sent them that launched the entire story back in the day when he shipped them to Ray Palmer, and that instigated the investigation. So yeah, sorry, go on, but yeah, it's a fascinating story.
That's great. I love tying it with Maury Island. The thing about this story is that the fragment disappeared. So like the government, took it. They never brought it back. No one can access. No one knows where it went. It's gone. It's so this is all documented, well documented. The police force, the government, everything. Wonderful story. So,
wow.
Yeah. And
just quickly, Ed, who's actually married to a lovely lady from China, said that, and I would never have known that the Chinese name XU is pronounced she with two E's. So I guess it's a long she. And he said, and he corrected himself, Zing as in Xing. I would have thought it was pronounced Zing, is actually pronounced Xing.
Xing. Oh,
Xing.
Okay.
So there we go.
She and Shing. Perfect. Thank you so much. That helps me a lot.
Yeah, I would have had
Awesome.
no idea. And I'm from Sydney, where we have a very big Chinese population, but I'm terrible with some of the pronunciations as well. Here's something Horace talking about the meteorite or the debris found. Smaller meteorites are usually cold, not hot when found. Part of the story has elements of Lovecraft's Color Out of Space with a happier ending.
Awesome.
That's true. Thank you, Horace.
Super cool.
But no, the Maury Island incident is it's just such a fascinating story. We could probably do a whole show just talking about that, you and I.
Absolutely.
Bob, I'm pretty sure.
I've got one more story.
I'd love to hear
ready?
another. I'm happy to go over if you've got another story for me.
Okay,
Absolutely.
I've got a great one. You guys are going to love this. This is awesome. This is a local story, but it has, it connects to the American Civil War. It's a very strange story. It's not necessarily paranormal, but if there's any treasure hunters out there, I would challenge you, if you're interested in finding this object that I'm about to describe, I would welcome you to come, find where we live. You could use our house as a base camp. I'll go out with you. I'll show you the area. I want to find this treasure. Here we go. So back in, 1853, Mr. George McClellan, you know the name from the Civil War. He was a general. He was a West Point graduate, served in the Mexican-American War, and then he became a surveyor. He was a railway engineer and executive until the outbreak of the American Civil War. November 1861 to March 1862, he was the commanding general of the U.S. Army. But before that, he came out to good old North Bend, Washington, and he was here under Governor Isaac Stevens, trying to locate a decent route to build a railroad from eastern to western Washington. He was surveying the land. And so he was very stubborn. He was very stubborn, and he was insubordinate. He didn't listen to his boss, and so there was a lot of tension between Governor Isaac Stevens and Mr. McClellan here. And so he kept a journal. He never wanted to listen to anybody. He'd always get lost in the woods. And so the story goes, and I heard this through my family. This is a folk tale that's been passed down forever. But apparently there was a cannon, a military cannon that George McClellan had brought to the area. Now, the purpose of this cannon was to defend the settlers and the U.S. government from possible Native American attack from Yakima and other tribes. And so he was scheduled to mount this cannon. In some versions of the story, he mounted the cannon successfully on McClellan's Butte, which is very close to the house here. And then later it never was used. And so the story is that the cannon then at some point slipped off the mountain and maybe is buried in a landslide. So over the years, my grandparents, my dad would mention it. My grandpa, he said, man, if you could ever find that cannon from McClellan, man, that would be worth a lot of money. So somewhere buried under this rock slide, there is a cannon from 1853.
Wow.
And it's one of those great treasures. The other story is that he was so embarrassed that he lost his load in the middle of the Snoqualmie River, and the cannon and everything washed down river. But he was so embarrassed about it, and he told his men, "Don't tell anybody what happened." And so it's very possible that the cannon is also possibly buried under Interstate 90. So that's the story I wanted to end with, and there you go.
Man, Bob, it was so much fun having you back on the show. It was great to talk to you last time. It was great to talk to you again now. I know everybody listening and commenting in the chat were having a great time and were enthralled by your tales as well. How do people get a hold of you, or how do people see what you're up to?
Oh, okay. Well, you just go on like Instagram. You can type in Bob Antone. There's also our band Tinkham Road, which is on YouTube. It's also on Spotify and iTunes. That's the band that I play in. I also have a YouTube channel where I play music. I'm a music teacher. I have private students. That's my main gig, but I love to tell stories, and we love to research obscure history of the area. We work with a lot of historical societies. So just type in our name in Google and it'll send you all over the damn place and you'll find us. There you go.
You're one of those rare people, Bob, who's incredibly talented at more than one things. I mean, I think most people like myself, I'm happy if I'm talented at one thing, but you're like this incredible storyteller and researcher, and you're also just an amazing musician. One of the highlights of making this film has been having your song Wizard Island in it and being able to work out how to use that within the structure of the film. So it's become a big part of the film, as I was mentioning to you before. But thanks so much, Bob. Let's keep in touch. You and I will be talking anyway. And Thank you so much for coming on the show tonight.
Thank you so much. That was so much fun. I had a good time.
It was a great time until I talk to you again, until I talk to everybody else out there. Keep it weird.